answer is blood.
Peter Garner will give us another lecture on the topic on One Belt, One Road and globalization. But this lecture will focus more on economy. Am I right?
Yes. On economics, it will be a little bit more teaching lecture, although tranquilo, as we say, no panic. It won't be in a strict lecture that you have to know afterwards. Nobody will ask you. It should be still something giving you some inside steps into academic work. So it is about, the topic is One Belt, One Road, One World, more or less implicit question mark, from economics, from economy of comparative advantage. This is the typical Ricardian economist concept, to socioeconomy of cooperative progressing. Whatever you talk about when it comes to economics is about social issues. I don't know if anybody intends to get into economics in a deeper way. There is this image of economics. It's actually very simple. You always have something like this, and then you have a couple of lines crossing, or you have something like this. That's basically economics. You put some figures into it, and then it looks exact. Then you can know everything what is going on in the economy. And you can know, if you do the calculations right, what is happening, why people work there, where they do, and do what they do. Why not wherever? Why are people coming to China or coming to Ireland? And why are enterprises doing their job here and not somewhere else? The idea is exact science. The reality is it's all kind of faked. What we have, we are talking about social issues, very complex, that cannot put into any of these equations. So don't get carried away if you read in the newspaper, even good newspapers like the Financial Times for economic development analysis. It's an excellent paper. It is not an objective science as we usually think it should be. There is an understanding which means in economics we just fade out certain aspects of reality. And why I start with this is that it is important simply for academic work, and this is a very, very general issue. Unfortunately, we frequently forget about it. It is about referencing. And this is what you do here. You always make a reference and say, in economics it's called ceteris paribus, under unchanged conditions. If everything remains the same, then this will happen. Unfortunately, conditions change. Unfortunately, we have to think about which reference do we have. In economics, and as well, really a general thing in terms of academic writing. Write from where you have whatever you have and whatever you state. If it's yours, but only then you say it's mine. It is as well an issue for us as reader of your work, for us as listener, for whatever you say, to know from where you are coming. Of course, in a general presentation, it's more or less relaxed. In an essay, academic essay, it has to be strict. I quote from here and there, and exactly from where it is, including page numbers, including web references, and. This is important. And I stop here with this general stuff of academic introduction into academic work. But there is one thing that is a kind of bridging from the general issue to something we will look at. I read the title of this presentation, and some of you may remember this term or short of WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So you see something on the computer screen, and you print it, and that's what you get. What is going behind the screen is something we don't know. And in many cases, we actually don't have to know. But with my presentation, I want to show or look more at what are we talking about. It is OBOR, of course, One Belt, One Road, but all the technicalities behind it, especially as it is a developing program that is not fixed, that we cannot look at in hindsight. This is something where we have to make the reference, but in this case where we don't have to know exactly all the details. How much money is involved, when had it been set up, who is involved. You can do this on your own, on the internet. Be careful using the internet. Sometimes what you see is not what actually is the fact. But there is another thing. What are we talking about if we talk about OBOR and comparative advantage? We are talking about actually something that is underlying, and that is called, or I would call it, development. A theory of development of economics. And as I said, economics is always more than these figures. It is always something that has to do with concrete societies, with government. And with Ireland. Why with Ireland? Because we are here in Ireland, and you are studying in Ireland, and it has to do something with China. Why China? Because China is the main player when it comes to OBOR. Do you know the difference between China and Ireland? I remembered it today. I needed a stamp. I bought a postcard. It's here on campus. You get a postcard. I asked, do you have stamps? No. But the post office is, all right. And you go straight on the main street and to the very end. And then you turn to the right. There's a new shopping center. Right. You got it? Really, Main Street, just go on. When I lived in China, in Changsha, some people say it's a medium-sized city, 9 million people. That's about double the population of here. You ask for a post stamp. I did this once. A post stamp? Yeah, a post stamp. What do you mean? Well, I said post stamp. What do you want to do? I want to send a letter. All right. You go to the back street. There are several places where you can post the letters. It's actually delivery services. It's not the post. I said, you don't have the post. Yeah, we have, but we don't use it. So this is one important aspect. Of course, you first think about 9 million against, I don't know how many people living in Maynooth. But there is another difference in terms of what you may call the development of the countries, the development of the economy, which is a complex thing. And then is another question taking up from yesterday. If you look at Ireland, I lived in the countryside, beautiful. And there had been actually horses. Talked yesterday about the horses. There had been horses, real horses, and people made huge amount of money out of it, especially during the boom years. not quite true, but in China you don't find horses. At least not to this extent. You find actually horses the same pattern in terms of equestrian sports, which is used as well by mostly rich people, but it does not have the role that it plays here in a country that is still very much shaped, at least by this agricultural tradition. If you go through, not to Dublin, but if you go through the country in Ireland, you have very much this image of a rural country, with all the beauties, and with all the concentration in one place, namely Dublin. And this is something where it is, of course, important, not only just the sheer size of the country in terms of population, in terms of distances, but as well in terms of concentration, agglomeration of industries. If we talk about a country like China, it's actually ridiculous. Because if we talk about it in terms of industrial development or development, economic development, you have huge differences. I don't know where east is, if here or there, but it is the east coast, south, where you have a strong economic center, which is a large area comparable with Dublin. Dublin is a large area if you relate it to Ireland, to the size of Ireland. You have other similarities in terms of this split means a social split as well. So you have the same pattern within the country we are talking about of comparative advantage. The best way of talking about things is talk about what you know. I lived on the so-called sheep line, sheep borderline. That was Cork going to northwest Cork, where cows said, no, stop here, I won't go further. Because what you offer me here, the grass, is not for me. Just get the sheep there, they are happy with it. So the same in China, you have some areas which are good for certain agricultural production. You have the coastline as an industrial belt. And then you have, of course, within these agglomerations, again, some comparative advantage that you have, for instance, in Shanghai, the Bund area, which is China. At least if you go to the countryside, really to the countryside, you would say this is another world. So the question is, why do you have this concentration of a certain industrial development or business development in certain areas? Why isn't it in other ways? Now, the one thing is, in Ireland or in China or wherever you go, people are just lazy. They don't bother. Life is beautiful without it. We don't need it. There is then, of course, a certain infrastructure. You have this in Ireland. Everybody said 20 years ago, all the money goes to Dublin. We can't do anything. Even a school, maintaining a school is difficult in a county like Kerry, Kingdom of Kerry, Republic of Cork. No. The center is Dublin. For whatever reason, historical reason. To break through this is extremely difficult. Beijing is, of course, the capital. And you can go on through, or you can go through history, and this is the place where not only economic activities took place, but where power was. And of course you go to power. And you go to power centers in your country. That is Beijing, that is Dublin, and that is not Washington anymore, but it is Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the new power center of United States of America. Now the question is, we'll come later to this, what is the center? And where can the center be? In China. Is it, to which extent, in which way is it Beijing, and in which way is it actually Shanghai, the Bund, not Shanghai? It's a question. I doubt that it is, but at least we have a shift in industrial and economic development that changes not only economic resources, but as well what I would say economic power structures. We have all these differences, I said, within countries, within small countries, within large countries. And you may have already an idea if I say, think about Silicon Valley being the center. Trump is just a puppet. He's not mad. He's a puppet of these people. If you look at the structures, it is very much certain power groups, economic power groups, that are making policies. And they are in Silicon Valley. It's funny, if you look at was it Facebook or Apple, now paying taxes due to new tax regulations. Now it pays out to pay taxes in the United States. Globalization. And this is part of it. What happens with economies from an agricultural economy in Ireland to a Dublin-centered high-tech center? In terms of politics, in terms of policies anyway, and in terms of the economy. What happens in a country where you have at least BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent? What happens in a country where these are really growing strong? Questions. And what happens in a world economy with all these differences, where the dominant idea is, sorry if I mention this name, get a Coke into every hut on this world. This was a kind of advertisement idea. Everybody should get a Coke, the Coca-Cola, the symbol of the Western culture, the symbol of Western wealth. Globalization, wherever you go. Go through the metropoles today, in China, in Asia, wherever you go, in Europe, you know it all. It's the same brand names. The question, how do we work, if you want, with this tension? What are the references? And the references, coming back a little bit to this, are aggregate figures. And from there we take, everybody has not the means to have this drink in the hut. Not everybody has actually a hut, because people are forced to migrate. But in general terms, if we look at the overall figures, everything looks fine. Everybody has the resources. The original idea, I say now original idea in terms of 1800 something, I'm very bad in figures, David Ricardo, economist, said, whatever we do in economic terms is we do what we are best in. Don't have the idea of having a skiing resort in Ireland and planting wine. Supposedly there is somebody growing wine here, getting 2 to 3 bottles per year. it's not really exciting for business. In Spain, in Portugal, you grow wine. In South Africa, you grow wine. No problem, you have mass production of good wine, excellent wine. So why torture yourself, torture the environment to get the 3 bottles out here if you can get it from another country? I was always surprised when I lived here and traveling, I saw curry butter wherever you go, in Germany, in France, and Guinness. Guinness is good for you. Butter, I don't know. But this is the export, or this was the export. Ireland exporting these goods because it was easy to produce it here. And easy means you have the qualification, you have the soil, you have the climate, and you have everything. Now, the idea of Ricardo was, at the end of the day, 2 countries are competing with each other. But they are not competing, producing the same, both producing wine, but they accept, I'm good in wine and you are good in the butter. We need somebody for the bread and cheese, because then you have a perfect meal, bread and cheese and butter. So you do what you are best in, and at the end of the day, even if you are better, if I am better in producing wine than you are, but you are not as good as in producing butter as I am, it still works out. That is better that I produce what I'm really much better in, meaning the comparative advantage. It is comparative advantage, it's not absolute advantage. And this is what followed us in did I say followed? What still follows us in economics. We still think in these terms of comparative advantage. Everybody does where they are good in. And being good in something means as well, if I am good in producing mass products, cheap mass products, with low wage workers, that's good. It's not just the product, but it is as well the conditions under which I produce. And this had been said to be the main advantage of Asian countries, and in particular of China. And then you can come up with these things. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. You can prove everything. And you can prove even what is politically highly interesting. That a Taiwanese, imagine Taiwanese company, it's like getting Tesco's here to Ireland, which was an outcry when it happened. Getting a Taiwanese company called Foxconn to China, producing everything extremely cheap. It's so fascinating, especially for another reason. They produce Apple telephones, they produce Samsung telephones, they produce, I don't know what telephones, probably Nokia and whoever still is on the market. They produce all the they produce their own competitors. They produce exactly this, what usually you don't do. In this model, you don't do it. You produce for yourself. Here they produce for others, and they produce for their competitors to get the prices even more down. Because this is what happens in this model. You produce for 2 different companies. They compete with each other. One way of competition is lowering the price. One way of lowering the price is putting the producer, the actual producer, under pressure, which means I get even less. Which means the Foxconn workers get even less. The Foxconn workers get even less. Which means there must be a way out. Foxconn changes now, as many others, wherever you go, to robots. If you ever had been in one of these beautiful companies, seeing these things produced, seeing the end product, and don't see anybody who works there, this is something at least a little bit weird. Now, I said Ricardo is still following us up to today. Comparative advantage, which is a competitive advantage, basically. This is the idea. But there is another point to it, that even economists are not completely blind. They know all these formulas and all these curves and slides and whatever, but they know as well there is a reality outside. And what we do today, after the old imperialism, after colonialism, India is free. I don't know when they bought out or whatever with Hong Kong. Hong Kong is not China, not England anymore, UK anymore. So these processes had been leading to another global constellation. Meaning, now there was real competition. Now it was not you do the one thing and you do the other thing, but now it's we try to be better than you in building the same thing. First it was about wine and butter. Now it is about the perfect meal in one country. Meals are not the perfect example, but it is about telephones, it is about Huawei, I think. It's the main competitor actually worldwide now with Apple. We in the West know, of course, more about Apple. It's the standard brand. But at the same time, we should know it is not anymore without this competition. But at the same time, we have two parallel developments. You have this, the complete product in different countries produced. The property structures are sometimes at least irritating. If you see Renault and the flagship, French flagship, our good Renault is owned by Chinese. The good old flagship in Sweden, the Volvo, is Chinese property, and at the same time you have a huge ongoing foreign direct investment in China and the other way around. This is a different story for analysis. It's hugely interesting, it's sometimes important as well. But what you have now is the acceptance and acknowledgement. I think it's not really much more of it is not as simple as that. It is not as simple as one country producing product A and the other country producing product B. And then they exchange it. The key term today is global value chain. The key idea that we hear, it's not WYSIWYG, what we hear is, what it is sold as, everybody contributes to the production of one product. It's amazing how many people are involved in the production of so-called smartphones. It's not just Apple sitting there doing the design, putting these things together and building it, and then getting a huge amount of money, much too much. But it is about different countries contributing it. Now, I don't know much about the technology. You have the processor in it, you have the software in it, you have I don't know what in it, you have the screen, which definitely breaks after some time. They are making sure that it does. You have different things. Everything produced in a different country, then brought to another country and assembled there, and then going on to be sold on whichever market. And everybody contributes. Even if you have an app, you develop an app making this phone more valuable, it's a contribution to increase the value of the phone. It doesn't matter where you are sitting. If you do it in the mountains, in the Alps, in Bavaria, if you do it in China, if you do it in the Philippines, or even if you do it in Papua New Guinea, it doesn't matter, as long as it is able to get into this so-called global value chain. Then making money. And of course the idea, because we are all striving for the idea of justice, everybody should get paid for the work or for the contribution. Which means you get paid for it, but what you get depends on the local conditions. Meaning, if there is low-wage country, you still get a low wage, even if it is you who actually makes it a phone. This isn't the relevant issue, what you do with the product, but the relevant issue is the value of your labor power. How much you contribute, and this depends on how much do you need to reproduce yourself. And how much this is a very complicated thing. It depends on infrastructure. It depends on having a belt there where industry is concentrated. It is a matter of transport, and it is a matter of need of transport. Whenever I buy a flight ticket, long haul, short haul, I'm wondering, how is it possible? I pay. There's a special offer. This is a funny thing. There's a special offer now. I guess it's one-way flight, but okay, that's another story. To China, weekend visit in China, 360 euro. I guess it's 600, 700 euro. But even 300 euro, how is it possible? I pay 300 euro, and this thing travels so cheap that it is worthwhile to travel. Okay, it doesn't get a meal, it doesn't get water. There's nobody looking after it, and is everything okay? But still, transport cost is so low that it works out, in many cases, to invest in the transport, to get things carried not only one way, but from here to there and multiple times, and even back. Because of course you can get the same smartphones you buy here, you can get them, for instance, in China. Now there's another thing with transport cost. This is, actually it doesn't cost anything. Marginal cost we talk about. The cost of sending a program with 50 gigabyte, is 50 gigabyte much? I don't know. With 300 gigabyte, the cost of transporting it from India, from China to here, 0.00 cent, I don't know. Just the electricity. You have the computer anywhere. The internet is provided by actually the state in many cases, or another private provider. You don't really have to pay much for it. The click of a mouse button, it's not really. But this is transport cost, which is so low in many areas that it is worthwhile actually to extend this global value chain and say, it doesn't matter wherever you do your business, do it. Transport cost doesn't matter. Qualification, we have this, what I said before, everybody speaks English. Hooray. It's very limited English in most of the cases, as native English speakers amongst you will notice with my English, but it is English. I will never be Charles Dickens or Shakespeare, but at least I can communicate. That's the most important thing. For the computer, you have your special language anyway. That doesn't matter at all. An interesting side remark, you have a change of language with the Scottish Enlightenment. When the capitalist system, capitalist economy developed, you have a change of language. Simplified English. It was getting much simpler to communicate because you reduced your language on what you needed as a general trend. This is the ground pattern from two different kinds of advantages. You still are producing, you're still exploited, but in a different way. Because they acknowledge your specific contribution to the entire product. It's not the reduction of the orientation, but it is the reduction of the share you get. Because this is what happens. Now, what is going on in China? Sorry again for saying in China, because in China is a misnomer. But if you look at the economy, short run through it, you have had the new economic system with Mao Zedong, a socialist system which was very much on autarkic orientation of small regions, actually. Looking for independence of small areas producing what they needed. Later it was called by the World Bank on some, not this, but it was a strategy called import substitution orientation. You don't import whatever you can produce yourself. This didn't really work out for different reasons, as well political reasons and. But then there was this kind of market opening. We produce for the market, still with many SOEs, state-owned enterprises, but it is a production for the market of commodities. And here we want to be competitive in the first sense, kind of division of labor. You produce whatever you are good in, and we move on. Moving on into this orientation on global value chains and trying to be part of the overall development and getting hugely rich. Those who come from China, those who had been there, those who studied a little bit, will know about the huge change in economic resources over the last years or decades. Actually, another similarity to Ireland. When I moved to Ireland, it was a very, very poor country. It was considered to be one of the poor houses of the European Union. And then it was the tiger, the Celtic tiger. Similar thing happened similar at the same time, very different, happened in China, that it was historically, over a relatively short period of time, getting enormously rich. And there's one thesis that they produced so much in terms of wealth that they actually didn't, as country, know what to do with it. In economics, you have to look at accumulation, you have to look at reinvestment. Economics, being a good entrepreneur, is not about getting rich. But being a good entrepreneur is being able to reinvest and doing it. Making a huge amount of money to reinvest. That's at least the basic idea. If you don't know in what you can invest, you look for external markets. As simple as that. Now bring two things together. Having too much money and having a development in industrial production, industrial processes, that is changing. That is not anymore about building cars, or building computers, or building houses. We have in China a huge overproduction of steel. What you are producing now is infrastructure-related communication. You have the potential, on the one hand, to develop, whatever it means, countries that are linked, finally I'm there, to this One Belt, One Road project. Countries along the old Silk Road. And now you come to politically hugely disputed issues, to allow them to join a development, to be rich, in a way to give part of the wealth you have to them, or you can say it's a means of controlling these countries, to subordinate their development and to make it useful for your own development. I leave this to another presentation. This is basically the two sides that are discussed and that are in conflict. Now, what is going to happen, and this is why I said in the beginning, I cannot go into details because it is a developing process. This is something where we have to look at. It is not simply about investment and reinvestment and these things of how much do I get out of it. It is about more, it is about development. And then I could go on to take another 2 hours or so, at least. I don't want to do this. But at least 2 points. One very general, a little bit linking back to what I said yesterday. It is about defining borders and defining space in terms of control, in terms of power. Power is a genuinely economic term. Power, I don't know actually what it means in Chinese. I discussed it with some Chinese people. It makes things even more difficult. Pouvoir in French, Macht in Deutsch. Macht comes from machen, doing something, and controlling. And now is my favorite. It's potere in Italian, or sapere far qualcosa, knowing how to do something, or bravura, excellent, bravo, or risquire a fare qualcosa, knowing how to get out of it, finding a solution. This is power. It's not just about control. This is a different way of interpreting what power is about. Then the second point to the end, I don't know enough or much about it, the political situation, but at least the 19th Congress last year, just to say farewell to me, that was just when I left, was actually stating at least that we need a reorientation of the policy. It's not simply about growing further, but it is about qualitative growth and finding a new way of distribution. Because the Chinese society today is extremely unequal. So it is about what they said, about addressing these issues. What happens, how serious they had been with such a statement, I don't know. It is at least something, and this way you can come back to this, it is at least something where you can say this is a new topic for the global economy. That we have to look for ways of coming together, of not competing in which way ever, but of finding a common way for the problems we face. Health issues, environmental issues, migration, including the cultural dimension, and then coming back to this point of we are all the same, are we? We are not all the same. You still like something special from wherever somebody visits you. You still like something nice as a present that is local. You still like your own language, actually. It's funny, wherever you go, you always switch back to your language, whichever it is. It can change to some extent, but it is your language. It is your culture. And with this coming back really to the end of this struggle of a new economic culture, and there is a place, no better place to do it than many years ago. The German writer Schiller wrote 2 sentences, I think, well, he wrote many sentences that are remarkable, but actually it's 3 sentences. The greater part of men are much too exhausted and enervated by their struggle with want to be able to engage in a new and severe contest with error. So don't dare anything, just do whatever you did before. Satisfied if they themselves can escape from the hard labor of thought, they willingly abandon to others the guardianship of their thoughts. So just continue to do whatever you want, or this comes from a different context, but I think it is as well worthwhile to think about it. Man only plays when in the full meaning of the word he is a man, and he's only completely a man when he plays. Same applies for women. It means basically be open, don't stick to the rules you know and that are encapsulated in some formulas like this, but try to get different contexts. Try to get out of competition, and then we can see what happens. The OBOR Silk Road, an old project being revived, is at least an opportunity. I don't say that it works out, because I don't know. Nobody knows. If you look at the political discussion within China, it's split. But at least it is a way of trying to get different countries together, working together instead of competing, and working together in terms of economic competition or growth, plus cultural issues. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the floor? I have one comment and one question. Thank you very much for this very inspiring presentation, especially the conclusion part about see the to jump out of the box, to not only focus on competition and profit economy, but actually to see from another perspective, to see the communication between nations, between civilizations, and what's the real point of this development as human beings, as a race. So you mentioned about the global value chain, and the latest development is that the United States, the superpower, or the only superpower in the world, is going to cut itself off from this global value chain because they believe that they are losing money, they are losing this competition. So just cut it off from this chain and play their own games. Just return to China back in the 1970s and close the door. We can produce, Americans can produce everything for Americans. And at the same time, Americans can export like this, everything, important things that the world needs. For example, the smartphone, it was made in China, but most of the profit actually, most of the technology is exported, and the chips inside exported by American companies to China, assembled in China only. So the question is, once America cut itself off from this global value chain, refused to share this growth with other parts of the world, with the EU, with China, with Asia, with Africa. And now at the moment it is strong enough, right, to keep its competitiveness, to keep its power, while they can still export everything to the outside world. And we have to do it. We have to use Microsoft. We have to use Intel. We have to use Android phones. We have to use all these chips produced in America. But how long do you think they can I mean, to maintain the position as the only superpower that can be independent from this global value chain? Or do you think maybe 10 or 20 years later, while this global value chain is consolidated by China, by South America, by the EU, by Africa, by Asia, while you see that America would decline eventually?
Well, there are many questions in it, actually. The one is the global value chain. Benjamin Selwyn, I think he talks about global poverty chains, meaning what you actually produce is, if you go on this way, you produce poverty in certain areas, in certain countries. Even if they get a small share, you produce poverty. And of course, this is something where in economics we are not struggling with it, but we are fighting over this thing, that some say, okay, you do in a way. We have had this in Ireland, this discussion, but if you are a little bit better off, because there are some really getting better off, you are at least a little bit better off. It's better than staying there. Where others say, but the gap, look at the gap, it's increasing. What's the point in struggling with something which makes us in relative terms poorer than we have been? The other thing is, I don't want to get personal. I think Mr. Trump is overestimated. He's not mad. But at the same time, he's a bad politician. Some people say he's simply mad. I don't believe in that. It is a question if this policy will be maintained for a long time. I doubt. You have in different areas, you have had the Obamacare, which didn't really go through. Then you have Trump care, which is going through because it is nothing. You have these changes. You have them in any country. It is difficult to say what is going on in how long. The general trend is, even if it is much hypocrisy, that this system competing faces problems that undermine its own position. You have with this increasingly precarity, people not having a proper job, be it academics, well equipped to work to program for Google or whatsoever, not getting a job, being people working in some enterprises, not getting a job, not getting a proper job, including the entire taxation system, including the income of the state. This is another point, actually, in what you asked. I forgot her name. She is now running around it. It's an old fact. Whatever they do, Apple, whatever the name is, Android, and I don't know. Whatever they do is not paid by them. A large chunk of developmental cost is paid by states. I'm working currently for an institute. It's not in that area. It's a law. We do the research that later somebody else will implement into business. You have to know how things work, very basic things. They cannot be applied, but you need them. And nobody invests into this area to make this little step then to make a business out of it. And the last thing is, I think to a very large extent, and this is again something difficult to estimate exactly, the influence of this distributed machine intelligence is most evident in the information technology industry itself. The internet has spawned enormously profitable and influential corporations with startling diminutive workforces, meaning much money, no people working on it. Sometimes I like figures. In 2012, Google, for example, generated a profit of nearly $14 billion, while employing fewer than 38,000 people. Contrast that with the automotive industry. At peak employment in 1979, General Motors alone had nearly 840,000 workers, but earned only about 11 billion. This is amazing. What do they do? And then I come back to another oldish economist, Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, who said the conquest of air will be more important than the conquest of India. The conquest of air will be more important than the conquest of India. You can colonize India, which they did. You can colonialize whatever, but when they colonialize the air, when they sell air in bottles, that is the real profit. And this is what they're doing. Every few weeks, a new update. This is hot air. And this is the point where I think this system will collapse. If they produce something real, I'm not against these phones or smartphones or whatever. If it's real, fine. But there is so much fake around it. That is the danger, I think, where this will collapse at some stage, because there is no point in producing more and more and more to maintain a machine that is running without any effect. Only with destroying, because at some stage there are many things spraying around. We don't know where to recycle them. How to recycle them. We produce every year, you need a new phone because the battery is broken and cannot be exchanged. Thanks to the EU it can. But at some stage we have to throw them away. And I think it's the United States won't be able to maintain this long. And I think the entire economy will possibly come back to what John Maynard Keynes said. He was a little bit wrong, but he said in 100 years, I think it was 100 years, yes, we have another couple of years to go, we will have this level of productivity that allows us to work 15 hours to work. And the rest we can do whatever we want to do. Education, learning languages, which you do now as well anyway, but going fishing, playing cards, playing with the kids. This is the trend where we have this inequality, and this is part of it. In coming to calculation, we would be able to say, yes, we have 15 hours. There are many people, they don't work at all. If you make this calculation globally, you are there. So power, back to power.